Hey everybody, Wendy Sellers here, the HR lady. Welcome back. Unfortunately, JC is not here today, but we have an amazing guest here to talking about neurodiversity and the modern workplace. And boy, this is such a hot topic. Today's guest is Serena Palmer, a coach and talent strategist who now supports others through coaching and sharing her experience of overcoming ADHD and addiction. Welcome to the show, Serena.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks so much, Wendy. I'm excited for this conversation.
I am too. I'm very excited, actually. And, tell us, our listeners, a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. I think, well, I guess you covered some of the headlines in your bio, but I think probably the best way to go about that is for me to fill in some of the gaps. So I'll probably start with saying I've lived what I comfortably refer to as a double life for about 20 years. So on the surface, I was, I guess, appearing to be a high flyer. I was global director of talent, equity, diversity, and inclusion for a really large global firm. And I've worked with really big brands. I've been driving strategies, senior leadership in HR, a qualified coach, but behind the scenes, I was year after year becoming more and more exhausted and depleted by what I now know is undiagnosed ADHD. So, I was born an ADHDer. I was
Hmm.
born in 1979. So my childhood in the 80s, we didn't really understand
Right,
ADHD. So, when I talk about this, I'm really clear to say that there's no finger of blame pointed, right? But
right.
um, what happens if you are increasing in responsibility and continuously feeling like an imposter and slightly on the wrong side of everything is you become, well, you've got two choices really. You either become exhausted and crash out, or you become an expert in mask wearing. And that's what I was. And eventually that takes its toll. I was self-medicating for years, calling myself a binge drinker, but in fact, I was an alcoholic. And alcoholism is it's a progressive illness, and it only gets worse. It never gets better.
Mm.
And eventually, I had what is so commonly referred to as a rock bottom moment. And that really forced me into making significant changes. So the realization that, eventually when I got my diagnosis of combined ADHD, I took that test with a psychiatrist about 4 or 5 years ago. But that was also at the time when my alcoholism was spiraling out of control. So almost the diagnosis at that point was too late.
Mm.
However, when I had my rock bottom moment, I realized that my entire life I needed to change. And I've always worked in the specialist field of talent, leadership development, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and I've always been a huge advocate for that. But then suddenly everything in my mind was either reinforced in terms of what I think companies need to be doing better when it comes to those topics, or things significantly changed. And
Yeah.
so that's where I am now. I started my business about 2 years ago, just over that. And I've designed my business around my neurodivergent brain. I'm clean and sober, and that's given me the freedom that I could never have imagined possible. So,
Wow. Well, first of all, congratulations. And second of all, thank you so much for being open and honest and sharing this. I think you're right. In the 70s, 80s, and honestly, even some of the 90s, this wasn't
mhm,
something that was openly talked about. People didn't even know what ADHD is, never mind the term neurodivergent.
yeah.
And it was a hush hush situation. And now, it's everywhere. I was reading a survey by Deloitte preparing for this conversation, and it said that research suggests that workplace teams that include neurodivergent professionals can be, check this out, 30% more productive than those without neurodivergent members. So it's like a hidden superpower that can also destroy you at the same time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, um, there's,
So,
there was even
Wendy,
another
there's
one. Go ahead.
just very quickly, just on that, that's what a brilliant statistic to share. And
Hmm.
the thing that you just referred to there is that the inclusion of neurodivergent individuals only increases productivity, output,
Right.
creativity, etc. The reason why it doesn't work is because we are operating in systems not designed for us. So,
Yes,
that
exactly. That was the next
yeah.
thing I was going to say. It was followed up by saying that they don't have any support. It said
Mm-hmm.
36% of neurodivergent employees report receiving no guidance, no support to adjust their workplace, and regardless in work or not, 18% of them had no idea even where to go. And I think that
Yeah.
has changed with age and even
Yeah.
with schools saying, okay, we know what's going on, but hopefully they're not actually pretending to be the doctors themselves. So, from your
Mm-hmm.
perspective, as someone with a neurodivergent, specifically ADHD, as well as other challenges, as a coach and as a talent strategist, where do you see the biggest gaps in how organizations understand and support people with some type of neurodiversity, whether it be
Yeah.
ADHD or something else?
Yeah. So I think the big kind of catch-all for this is the way in which we view topics around neurodiversity or any point of difference. We're viewing it still as a deficit to be fixed.
Yes.
And what we fail to recognize is that all of these points of difference, and I'll stay with neurodivergence for a moment, there are enormous benefits to a neurodivergent brain. The ability to pattern recognize faster than a neurotypical person. So that isn't just excuse me, when I say pattern recognize, like, people often think of those sort of intelligence tests, right? and
Hmm.
and that sort of stuff. I'm talking about any type of patterning. So it could
Right.
be human behavior. So we're one of the sort of myths and legends around ADHD is that they're highly intuitive and that sort of thing. And that's true. But if you look at why that is, it's because it's still a pattern to be recognized. So walking into a room and sort of meeting a room of strangers and suddenly kind of weighing somebody up and thinking, right, I know this kind of person. That is the type of pattern recognition that I'm referring to. So the issues that we've got are still sitting with the idea of it's a deficit that needs to be fixed. And that's because a lot of the language around it is about special measures. What special things do we need to do? And then, of course, leaders start to view this as a huge burden.
Yeah.
And that is the absolute opposite way of how we should be approaching it. So, reviewing everybody's assets is important. So, knowing the core character strengths of your team, regardless of whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent. But it's also the bolt on. So for such a long time, things like equity, diversity, and inclusion, that's where you'll have conversations, whether it's about women's health, whether it is about neurodivergence, whatever the sort of key focus area is, it's still positioned in corporate as a bolt on, where in fact we should begin all of our processes by thinking about how do we create a universal design which is beneficial to everyone. So we know this from history. Any improvement that we make, so if we think about making changes for people with physical disabilities or wheelchair access,
Right.
that's been around in our lives for a very long time. That also benefits so many other people, elderly
Absolutely.
people. It benefits people from every different walk of life, not just wheelchair users. And that philosophy is true of all things. So what we need to be doing is starting a universal design mantra where we think about how we communicate, how we strategize, which is already inclusive. The utopia is to not have a separate EDI conversation or a separate neurodivergence conversation, because that would become defunct if we were to then look at how we create systems and processes with that in mind.
Yeah, Absolutely. I mean, I'm loving this conversation, by the way, but I'm now putting myself like in a manager's shoes, and this could be quite overwhelming to a manager. So, you work with major organizations to build
Yeah.
stronger leaders. How can HR teams make this easier for managers? How can HR teams integrate neuro-inclusive principles into like leadership development programs without overwhelming those managers who may feel awkward. They may feel, oh no, I'm going to break a law. What do I do?
Yeah.
I'll just do nothing. And we don't want them to
Right.
do that. So, what are your thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah, I literally, this is my favorite thing to talk about because the great fear, because, if we look across, you're based in the US, I'm in the UK. If we just look at media for 1 second, the way in which we structure and talk about these things is always with a lens of fear. And so
Yes.
therefore it becomes palpable. Nobody wants to get cancelled. And particularly by accident, if you're not setting out to offend, you certainly don't want to fall down that trap. And that's a real risk that people feel is right in front of them. So here's where we can just remove and take away that pressure. So as human beings, we are all different. Everybody's got different needs, curiosities, etc. Where leaders get so terrified is in the sort of legal aspects of things.
Yes.
So here's where I would give two pieces of kind of solid advice. You are in a leadership position because you're excellent at your job. That's why they've given you that role. No one is expecting you to be a clinician or a doctor. So
Right. Thank you.
diagnosing,
Thank you.
you know, I can't cook. So if somebody suddenly said a new leadership thing was to make sure that I was able to cook and blah, 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 I'd be terrified too. I'm not qualified. I don't know what I'm doing. So no one needs you to be a doctor. No one needs you to be a clinician. What we do need you to do is to be curious and genuinely, authentically curious. Asking questions of everybody, not just the people who have a diagnosed ADHD or autism, everyone. And those questions are really, really simple. It's how do you work best?
Right.
That's the first question. How do you work best? And allow the space for that individual to just talk through, because sometimes we don't quite know until we're talking, particularly people like me who think by talking, we don't quite know yet. So give people space and ask a really simple question. How do you work best? And then the reverse of that question, what things hinder or get in the way of you working at your best? And if you
Yeah.
ask inclusively everyone in the team that, you'll have so much rich information around how do we then structure things in a way that everybody can operate at their best. The other
Yeah.
thing I
I
would
love
say,
it.
that would be my first thing, curious, big, open questions and space and time.
And
Yeah,
I would also suggest even like once you get used to doing this, maybe you have some examples of do you work best by this or that or some other thing, details, no details, because if somebody asks another human that and no one's ever asked them, they may just have this blank look on their face going, I have no idea. Give me some options. Oh, okay, yeah, no, that's not going to work for me. This over
yeah,
here will work for me. So not leading them to an answer, but at least giving some ideas.
yeah.
This is so helpful.
Yeah, exactly that. So I think that's a really excellent point. So some people will just draw a blank at that, right? So if you
Yeah.
frame it in, let's talk about physical environment. So start with that. So is if you're in an office, if you work from home, if you've got hybrid, etc., what types of tasks lend themselves well to different environments, and then talk about communication. Then talk about time, what time of day, etc., etc. Get people to just start poking and prodding around what a day-to-day life could be working at their best. How would that look? The second thing is, I can't emphasize enough that in the scarier bits of these conversations, the leader doesn't need to be the expert. So
Yes, thank you.
it takes one to help one, which is why when it comes to things like addiction recovery, you get so much more success by pairing somebody who is in active addiction with someone who has been there and is now on the other side of recovery. That's why the fellowship like AA, for example, has been existed for 150 years. It takes one to help one. Exactly the same with neurodiversity. It takes one to help one, which is why so many of my executive coaching clients are ADHDers, and most of which are late diagnosed. Because when you hear your own story told back to you from someone who's been there and has crossed the line into finding tools and ways in which to navigate, then everything makes much more sense. So my second piece of advice for leaders is just have a wealth of people who with lived experience to come in and talk and open that conversation, because that is exactly where you can create a level playing field. And you
Yeah.
also don't need to come up with those answers yourself. So learning together as a team is excellent.
Yeah, and it also takes away that stigma, right? That as we mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, I think there's less and less stigma, thankfully, but it's still there. You know, we as humans have a long way to go. But folks, remember what I said in the beginning, that having neurodivergent people on your team, will increase productivity if managed accurately. So exactly what she is saying here. And I read another statistic that said up to 20% of people may have some type of neurodivergent challenge. And
Mm-hmm.
I was doing some research myself, which we won't go into. Hello, I'm in menopause, and it there's a lot of research that says women are often undiagnosed with ADHD specifically until they are in the middle of menopause. Like, hey, don't throw anything else at us, right?
Yeah, yeah. So
But
there is a reason for that. So we've got the societal historical lack of diagnosis for women, because ADHD, as in so many different medical issues, was tested and all the sample cases were men.
yes,
And it's only until remarkably recently that they have included women in those tests.
yeah,
That's one key thing. The second thing is there is a direct correlation with hormonal changes and your most difficult or challenging ADHD symptom becoming exasperated by that. So if you suddenly become depleted in estrogen, then you are already depleted in dopamine. So, ADHD individuals are born with dysregulated, less access to dopamine. We do not have the same as neurotypical people. So, if somebody was born with less blood, they would be fainting, they'd
right.
be having to eat, we would all understand it. Dopamine is a core chemical for function. It's not just about feeling good, it's about motivation, it's about energy to brush your teeth, it's about all of these things, right? So when you lose
Yes.
your estrogen combined with an already existing lack of dopamine, then your symptoms that somehow you've muddled through most of your life, suddenly you cannot. And that's
Yeah.
why that's all happening at the same time.
Thank you. I feel like I'm in a therapy session. Thank you. And I hope everybody that's listening, many of our listeners are probably nodding their head going, oh my goodness, thank you so much. Hey, let's switch gears here or keep going on this conversation and talk about, your personal journey,
Mm.
which includes navigating both ADHD and recovery. What
Mm-hmm.
do, managers, HR professionals often misunderstand about employees managing ADHD or addiction histories, and how can we improve this?
Yeah. So I think you mentioned earlier we're doing better with the stigma around ADHD or neurodivergence as a topic. We are not doing better when it comes to talking about addiction in the
Yes,
workplace.
agree.
It is still the dirty little secret. It is
Yes,
still viewed as a huge failure, yeah, and something that must never be spoken about. forgive me for a second. I'm just going to get on my bandwagon a little bit about this.
No,
So
go for it.
my eyes were really open to something, my recovery journey. I am lucky and privileged that I was able to access a rehab. Not everybody can afford to do that. Not everybody would be able to do that. And I totally see and understand that, right? In that time, I was on obviously my own recovery journey. The first part of that is accepting that you are an addict and what that is. And not everyone gets to that place. And so, recovery doesn't work for everyone at the same time. But I was in there with some of the most remarkable human beings I've ever met in my life. And what struck me was the amount of high achievers in the room. So people come and go in rehab, you check in, but someone's just leaving and, all of this kind of stuff. The dominant group were high functioning, highly successful individuals, most of which would categorize their drinking as binge drinking, by the way. So not what we assume an alcoholic is, which is somebody sort of destitute or having to drink when they wake up in the morning. So this was curious to me and very, very interesting. And then I had a real sort of lightning bolt moment when I was there for 28 days, and towards the end of my time there was a conversation about the importance of honesty in recovery. So to recover, it begins with being honest to yourself about who you are, what's going on, and the honest truth of you. And then it's honesty for other people. And that has to be the core, it's the core sort of, I guess, the core motivator for an ongoing successful recovery. And suddenly people were like, we're afraid to talk to friends and family, etc., but we do, because we're sticking to that honesty piece. But the rules changed when it came to talking about work. Without exception, everybody there said, I'm happy to talk to friends, family, I need to make amends, etc. I will never tell my boss. My boss thinks I'm on stress leave. My boss thinks I've burnt out and I've gone, everybody was lying to work. And the reason behind that is the fear of the damage to their reputation, because a lot of them are high achieving people from every industry you can imagine: judges, police officers, corporate people, you name it. And not one of them, not one, would consider having that conversation with work. The fear that their reputation would be damaged, and followed by they would be axed. They'd be out of there.
And this is obviously a global situation, because I'm calling in from the United States and you're calling in from
the UK.
Yeah. So this isn't just like, oh, this is just in the US or just in UK. This is everywhere.
No.
How eye-opening, how depressing at the same time.
Right. And then I took that thought, Wendy, and I just was suddenly outraged. And I think it is unacceptable. I think we have moved into such a progressive place when it comes to talking about mental health, stress management, and now even neurodivergence. But the addiction issue remains something that is never spoken about. And the fear is enormous, and it's compounded by every element of society, particularly with things like drink, So alcohol is one of the only drugs that will kill you when you suddenly stop taking it. That is one of the most common causes of an alcoholic death, is suddenly ceasing and having a seizure. The second thing is, alcohol is also the only drug that people question you as to why you don't take it. So there's problems everywhere.
Right. Good point.
And I see this. I don't know how this may translate in the US. In the UK, it's very common for offices to have little posters in the cubicles in the toilets, which say employee helpline. And this is where they say, do you have a problem with gambling, drink, drugs, etc.? And then there's a sort of secret number that you can telephone. And these posters are on the back of the cubicle door in the toilets.
Yes.
If ever there was a metaphor for how we view addiction, it's that.
Wow, that is so profound right there. I would say in the US, we don't have it as common, but definitely in public organizations, I see it a lot, or government organizations, I should say. And then, I would say savvy HR departments probably have it in the restroom too, but you're right. They are going with the community thought of this is a secret. It needs to be hushed, and we know you're never going to tell us, but here's a hotline you could call and you don't have to tell us. And so there's pros and cons of that, right? Of going with the secret and or just, putting it on the break room board or in the lunchroom, but then maybe somebody would be embarrassed to look at it because they don't want their coworkers to know. Huge, huge catch 22 here, but my eyes are wide open. Thank you for bringing that up. Whoa. Oh, we,
Let's put it everywhere. So that's
yes,
so if it just becomes so commonplace and it's in the toilets, which is where you can maybe store the number in your phone. I'm
yes,
not suggesting for a second that people need to walk around the office, on the helpline telling everyone.
yes.
But it's the fact that that is the only place where it is. So if it's in the cafeteria, if it's on a notice board, if it's where all the other notices are, it becomes just a little bit more normalized.
Yeah. I think this goes into my next question just about shifting the perception and the culture, the mindset. And once you do that, A, about neurodiversity and addiction, then you're really even switching the mindset about creating truly inclusive, high performing teams. Talk to me about the work that you've done with some of your clients on that.
Yeah. So a truly inclusive, high performing team is the utopia for everyone. It's that sort of
Right?
thing that that everyone is striving for. And so the core principles for this really are very, very basic. It's broadening the topics that we talk about as a team. And the only way we can do that is to start with, it's an age old thing. I'm going to just repeat it: trust and authentic leadership. There is nothing more powerful than a leader sitting with the team and saying, I don't know anything about this topic. I'm going to bring somebody in who does, and I want to learn with you.
Right.
It's level setting. And so, as soon as a leader is able to demonstrate curiosity around difficult subjects, what that then enables is people within that team to feel safe that there is a leader of this team that may just listen to me when I'm explaining XYZ. And
Yeah.
this is what it's all about. So, curiosity, authentic leadership, and trust. That's the foundation of everything. And it's been there since time began.
Yeah.
Viewing these topics as terrifying, and so that creates paralysis, will be the fastest way to lose your high performers. So,
Yeah.
it does correlate that high achieving individuals are often the ones who are struggling silently the most.
Right. And you may not, for lack of a better word, even, assume or judge them because they are high performing, but it turns out they're the ones that need the help as well. I wanted to reiterate some statistics that I mentioned earlier, and then, before we wrap up here, that again, uh, people that have some type of neurodiversity are often 30% more productive than those that do not. But there may be in the world up to 20% of our people may be neurodivergent. So if we are not having some kind of neurodiversity plan, action plan, an expert like yourself coming in to talk to the organization, then we're already missing a huge boat of candidates, of current employees, of long-term employees, of new employees, and then we're still leaving that shame in there, right? And we're
Mm,
missing productivity. Like, why don't
mm,
we use this, as I mentioned earlier? I think it's like a superpower, but it just needs some help. What are your
yeah,
final thoughts on that?
yeah. It's here's what I've learned about myself. I've created a business that I work for myself, and I've been fascinated to see when I've unshackled from all the rules and the systems and the processes and expectations that we have in corporate life, I have been fascinated to watch my own productivity. So within a period of 12 months, I wrote 2 books. I set up my own business. I did an article in a big newspaper. I did all these things in 12 months. And I was really giving myself a hard time because I kept working late. I kept starting later in the day and working late. And when I realized I don't have to apologize to anyone, I am my own boss. Reminder, you're a grown up. But second of all, guess what? That is my best operating time. So I have been more productive in those 12 months than I think I have in my entire career, and deeply proud of what I've achieved. And it takes a lot for me to say that because I've been somebody who's always not been good at saying what I'm good at. But I have lived in my superpower. And so what that looks like for me is periods of intense hyper focus. I work strange hours. What I produce is excellent. And I learn fast when I do it that way. So my challenge to organizations, and I get that we have to have a way of everybody being accessible, core working hours, but wherever there is a point of freedom within a system or a process, take it. Take the shackles off. If there is something that exists just for the sake of it, question it. Because what that does is it frees people to be their excellent selves.
I love
So
it.
that I would probably go for days and days on this, but that will have to be my core moment. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, what are the names of your books?
So I wrote a recovery journal, which is sort of practical journal you fill in day to day, purely because I couldn't find one that asked me the right prompts on a day-to-day basis. So that's called Straight Out of Rehab. It's available on Google Google, Amazon. And then I wrote my story, which is called My Two Brains and Me, which is how I've often felt like I've had two brains. And
Right.
that is, I guess, a brutally honest, sometimes surprisingly funny look at my journey to where I am now and the
Well, I
level.
will definitely be getting that book for sure, the My Two Brains and possibly even the journal too.
Yeah.
That's just amazing. Congratulations for all your success and your recovery. And how can people connect with you?
I love people to connect with me. So LinkedIn, I'm on there, Serena Palmer. Also, if you just go to my website, which is serena.consulting, then there's links to my social media channels on Facebook and YouTube, etc. But
Excellent.
yeah.
I'll make sure that your all your information is in the podcast notes. And if anybody is listening to this after the fact, I'll make sure that I, Wendy Sellers, tag Serena on LinkedIn as well. Thank you so much for your time today. Hey, everybody. I hope this podcast session has been beneficial. It's been beneficial to me and very eye-opening. Take care and stay safe. Take care, Serena.
Thank you.